The air in the congressional hearing room was electric, humming with the kind of anticipation that only comes before a storm. Every seat was filled, every camera was trained on the committee table, and every reporter in the gallery was poised, ready to capture a moment that, even before it happened, felt historic. The stakes were high, but the tension was personal. This wasn't just another policy debate or a routine exchange of political barbs. This was a collision of generations, ideologies, and identities. A confrontation that would test not only the intelligence and preparation of two powerful women but the very soul of American politics. Senator Marsha Blackburn, a fixture of Tennessee politics and a master of the old guard's playbook, sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her expression a mask of practiced confidence. She wore her experience like armor, every line on her face a testament to decades spent navigating the treacherous waters of Washington. Her reputation preceded her, sharp-tongued, unyielding, and unafraid to wield her authority like a weapon. For years, Blackburn had made a name for herself by outmaneuvering opponents, especially those she perceived as inexperienced or unworthy of her respect. Today, she was ready for another round, convinced that her wit and wisdom would once again carry the day. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising star from Texas, whose presence radiated a different kind of power. Young, black, and unapologetically outspoken, Crockett represented a new generation of leadership, one that refused to be cowed by tradition or silenced by condescension. Her journey to this moment had been anything but easy. From her days as a civil rights attorney to her rapid ascent in Congress, Crockett had faced doubters at every turn, but she had learned to meet every challenge with meticulous preparation and an unshakable sense of self. Today, she was ready, not just to defend her ideas, but to stand her ground against anyone who tried to diminish her. The hearing was supposed to be about economic development, a topic that, on the surface, seemed dry and technical. But beneath the spreadsheets and policy jargon, deeper currents were swirling. The bill under discussion promised to bring much-needed investment to underserved communities, a cause close to Crockett's heart and central to her district's future. For Blackburn, however, the hearing was an opportunity, a stage on which to reassert her dominance and remind everyone, especially the younger, more progressive members, who really held the reins of power. As the session began, Blackburn wasted no time setting the tone. Her questions were pointed, her comments laced with barely concealed disdain. She referenced her years in business, her deep understanding of fiscal policy, and her supposed mastery of the issues at hand. Each time she spoke, her gaze lingered on Crockett, her words dripping with the kind of patronizing skepticism that had become all too familiar to women and people of color in positions of authority. "I'm concerned," Blackburn intoned, "that some of my colleagues may not fully grasp the long-term implications of this kind of spending." The implication was clear, and the cameras caught every nuance. Crockett, for her part, remained composed. She listened intently, taking notes, her face betraying nothing. But those who knew her understood that beneath the calm exterior, her mind was working overtime, cataloging every slight, every assumption, every attempt to undermine her. She had come prepared, armed not just with facts and figures, but with a deep understanding of the dynamics at play. She knew that this was about more than policy. It was about respect, representation, and the right to be heard. As the morning wore on, the exchanges grew sharper. Blackburn's jabs became more direct, her tone more dismissive. She questioned the feasibility of Crockett's proposals, mocked her reliance on theory over practice, and, at one point, suggested that some members might benefit from a little more real-world experience. The room grew tense, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters exchanged glances, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Then, as if on cue, Blackburn delivered the line that would echo far beyond the walls of the hearing room. "Maybe if the gentlewoman from Texas spent less time on social media and more time reading up on basic economics, she'd understand what's really at stake here." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Even the stenographer paused, her fingers hovering above the keys. Crockett looked up, her eyes meeting Blackburn's across the table. The room held its breath, waiting for her response. The silence that followed Blackburn's remark was almost deafening. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room. It presses in on every person present, demanding attention, refusing to be ignored. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion on the faces of the committee members. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the blatant disrespect. Others leaned forward, eager to witness what would happen next. On social media, the moment was already being clipped and shared. The hashtag Blackburn vs. Crockett, beginning to trend as viewers across the country tuned in to see how the young Congresswoman would respond. Jasmine Crockett didn't rush. She didn't let the sting of the insult show. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate breath, her composure unshaken. She glanced down at her notes, then back up at Blackburn, her expression calm but resolute. In that instant, it was clear to everyone. Watching that Crockett was not about to be rattled. She had faced worse than this. She had built her career on turning underestimation into opportunity. "Thank you, Senator Blackburn," Crockett began, her voice steady and clear, carrying easily across the room. "I appreciate your concern for my reading habits. I assure you, I take my responsibilities and my preparation very seriously." There was no trace of anger in her tone, only a quiet confidence that seemed to grow with every word. "In fact, I spent the weekend reviewing the Federal Reserve's latest report on regional economic disparities, as well as the Congressional Budget Office's analysis of small business incentives. I'd be happy to share my notes with the committee. If anyone is interested in a substantive discussion." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Blackburn's smirk faltered. "Just for a moment," Crockett continued, her words measured but pointed. "I also took the liberty of reviewing the voting records of this committee, including your own, Senator. I noticed that you voted against the Small Business Innovation Research Program reauthorization in 2019, a program that's brought over $30 billion in investment to small businesses nationwide, including thousands in your own state of Tennessee." The effect was immediate. Reporters began typing furiously, realizing that the narrative was shifting. Crockett wasn't just defending herself, she was turning the tables, using Blackburn's own record as a shield and a sword. The contrast between the two women was stark, one relying on condescension and assumption, the other on preparation and facts. But Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I understand that experience is valuable, Senator, but so is evidence. So is showing up, doing the work, and being willing to learn from those who may not look or sound like you. I may be younger, and I may have a different background, but I am here because my constituents trust me to fight for them, and I intend to do just that." The room was silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was charged with respect, with the recognition that something important had just happened. Even some of Blackburn's colleagues seemed to shift in their seats, uncomfortable with the senator's earlier bravado. Blackburn, for her part, tried to recover. She adjusted her glasses, forced a smile, and attempted to steer the conversation back to the bill at hand. But the momentum had shifted. Crockett's response had not only neutralized the insult, it had exposed the emptiness of Blackburn's attack. The cameras lingered on Crockett, capturing the quiet strength in her posture, the determination in her eyes. Outside the hearing room, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with praise for Crockett's poise and preparation. Political commentators called it a masterclass in composure under fire. Young women, especially women of color, shared the clip with messages of solidarity and pride. "This is what leadership looks like," one tweet read, echoing the sentiment of thousands. But for Crockett, the work was just beginning. She knew that this moment, as powerful as it was, would not be the last time she faced such challenges. The old guard would not yield easily, but she also knew that she had set a new standard, one that demanded respect, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. As the hearing resumed, the energy in the room had shifted. The initial tension had given way to a new kind of anticipation, one that buzzed with the possibility of change. Crockett's words lingered in the air, a quiet rebuke to the old ways of doing business. Even those who had come expecting a routine display of political theater now found themselves leaning in, eager to see what would unfold next. Blackburn, sensing the change, tried to regain control. She launched into a lengthy monologue about fiscal responsibility, peppering her speech with technical jargon and references to her years in business. But the effect was muted. Where once her words might have cowed her colleagues, now they seemed defensive, even hollow. The contrast was unmistakable. Blackburn's authority rested on her past, on the weight of tradition and seniority. Crockett's, by contrast, was rooted in the present, in preparation, in facts, and in the courage to challenge the status quo. Crockett listened attentively, never interrupting, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't waste time on platitudes. Instead, she addressed the substance of the bill, citing specific data from her district and referencing studies that supported her position. She spoke with clarity and conviction, her arguments grounded in evidence rather than ideology. "Senator Blackburn," she said at one point, "you've spoken about the importance of real-world experience. I agree. That's why I've spent the past year meeting with small business owners in my district, listening to their concerns, and working with local leaders to develop solutions that actually work. The data I've presented today isn't just theory, it's the lived reality of the people I represent." The room was quiet, the weight of her words settling over the committee. Even those who disagreed with her politics couldn't deny the force of her argument. She wasn't just prepared, she was present, engaged, and deeply invested in the outcome of the debate. Blackburn, for her part, seemed increasingly flustered. She interrupted, tried to redirect, even attempted a few more jabs at Crockett's supposed inexperience, but each time, Crockett responded with calm, measured rebuttals, refusing to be drawn into a shouting match. The more Blackburn pressed, the more isolated she appeared, her authority eroding with every failed attempt to regain the upper hand. Outside the hearing room, the story was spreading. News outlets picked up the exchange, framing it as a generational clash, a battle between the old guard and the new. Commentators praised Crockett's composure, noting how she had turned a personal attack into an opportunity to showcase her expertise. The clip of her response went viral, shared by millions who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles and aspirations. For many viewers, the moment was about more than politics. It was about dignity, about the right to be taken seriously, regardless of age, race, or background. Crockett's refusal to be diminished resonated deeply, especially with those who had faced similar challenges in their own lives. She became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of possibility. Back in the hearing room, the work continued. Crockett asked pointed questions about the bill's implementation, pressed for accountability, and offered amendments designed to strengthen its impact. Her colleagues, seeing her in a new light, began to engage with her ideas more seriously. Even those who had been skeptical now found themselves listening, considering, and, in some cases, agreeing. Blackburn, meanwhile, grew quieter. The confidence that had defined her earlier demeanor was gone, replaced by a kind of wary defensiveness. She answered questions, but her responses were shorter, less assured. The room, once her domain, now felt unfamiliar, a place where her usual tactics no longer worked. As the hearing drew to a close, it was clear that something fundamental had shifted. The old rules no longer applied. Respect had to be earned, not demanded. Authority was no longer a given, it had to be demonstrated, day after day, through preparation, integrity, and a willingness to listen. Crockett gathered her papers, thanked. The committee had left the room with her head held high. The cameras followed her, capturing the moment for history. Outside, supporters waited, eager to congratulate her, to thank her for standing up. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated. The aftermath of the hearing rippled far beyond the marble halls of Congress. Within hours, news outlets across the country were running headlines about the confrontation, each one more dramatic than the last. Crockett schools Blackburn in viral showdown, read one. A new voice rises in Congress, declared another. The story was everywhere, on television, in newspapers, and, most powerfully, across social media platforms where the public's voice could not be ignored. For Jasmine Crockett, the response was overwhelming. Her office was flooded with messages of support from constituents, colleagues, and strangers alike. Young women, especially women of color, wrote to say how much her composure and command had inspired them. "You showed us what's possible." Read one email from a college student in Atlanta. "You made me believe I could do it, too." The clip of her response to Blackburn was shared millions of times, dissected by political analysts, and even played in classrooms as an example of how to handle adversity with grace and strength. But Crockett was not content to rest on a single moment. She understood that real change required more than a viral video. In the days that followed, she doubled down on her work, meeting with community leaders, drafting new legislation, and continuing to advocate for the economic development bill that had sparked the confrontation. Her focus remained on the people she represented, the small business owners, the families struggling to make ends meet, the young people looking for hope in a system that too often overlooked them. Meanwhile, the impact on Marsha Blackburn was equally profound, though in a very different way. The senator's office released a brief statement attempting to downplay the incident, but the damage was done. Her comments were widely condemned, not just by political opponents but by members of her own party who recognized the danger of appearing out of touch in an era demanding accountability and respect. Conservative commentators struggled to defend her, some choosing instead to remain silent, hoping the controversy would fade. But it did not fade. Instead, it grew, fueled by a public hungry for authenticity and tired of the old politics of division and condescension. Blackburn's record came under renewed scrutiny, with journalists digging into her past votes, her business claims, and her attendance at committee meetings. The narrative that emerged was not flattering, a portrait of a politician more interested in maintaining power than in serving her constituents. For Crockett, the moment became a springboard. Invitations poured in from across the country, requests to speak at universities, to appear on national news programs, to share her perspective on leadership and resilience. She accepted many of these invitations, using each platform to amplify her message and to encourage others to step forward, to prepare, and to never back down in the face of disrespect. The contrast between the two women could not have been more stark. Blackburn, once seen as a formidable force, now appeared diminished, her authority undermined by her own words and actions. Crockett, on the other hand, emerged as a leader for a new era, one defined not by age or seniority, but by substance, preparation, and the courage to speak truth to power. In the weeks that followed, the Economic Development Bill passed out of committee with bipartisan support, thanks in large part to Crockett's advocacy and the attention the hearing had brought to the issue. The victory was not just legislative, it was symbolic, a testament to the power of preparation and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. For many, the hearing became a touchstone, a story retold in offices, classrooms, and homes across the country. It was a reminder that respect is not given, it is earned, that authority is not inherited, it is demonstrated, and that, sometimes, the most powerful response to an insult is not anger, but excellence. As Crockett continued her work, she carried, with her, the lessons of that day. She knew that there would be more challenges, more moments when her intelligence and integrity would be questioned, but she also knew that she was ready. She had faced the storm and emerged stronger, her voice clearer, her resolve unbreakable. The story of that hearing room confrontation quickly took on a life of its own, becoming more than just a headline or a trending topic. It became a symbol, a rallying cry for those who had long felt sidelined by the old rules of power. In coffee shops and classrooms, in boardrooms and break rooms, people talked about what they had seen. They talked about the way Crockett had refused to be rattled, the way she had turned an insult into an opportunity, the way she had used facts and preparation to dismantle not just an argument, but an entire way of thinking. For many, it was personal. They saw in Crockett's.com measured response a reflection of their own experiences, moments when they had been underestimated, talked down to, or dismissed. They shared stories of job interviews where their qualifications had been questioned, of meetings where their ideas had been ignored, of classrooms where their voices had been drowned out by louder, older, or more privileged peers. Crockett's victory was their victory, her poise their inspiration. The media, sensing the resonance of the story, continued to amplify it. Editorials praised Crockett's masterclass in political communication, while op-eds called for a new standard of leadership, one based not on seniority or bluster, but on substance and respect. Political analysts dissected the exchange, noting how Crockett's approach had shifted the dynamic, forcing even her critics to acknowledge her expertise. The phrase Crockett moment began to circulate, shorthand for any instance when someone turned the tables on a bully with nothing but facts and composure. But the impact was not limited to words. In the days after the hearing, Crockett's campaign saw a surge in donations, many from first-time contributors who cited her performance as their reason for giving. Volunteers signed up in record numbers, eager to be part of a movement that felt fresh, authentic, and grounded in real values. Community leaders reached out, offering support and seeking advice on how to replicate her approach in their own spheres of influence. Inside Congress, the ripple effects were just as significant. Younger members, especially women and people of color, reported feeling emboldened by Crockett's example. They began to speak up more forcefully in committee meetings, to challenge assumptions, to demand that their voices be heard. The old guard, for their part, found themselves on the defensive, forced to reckon with a new reality in which authority could no longer be taken for granted. Even Blackburn's allies were forced to reconsider their tactics. Some quietly distanced themselves, wary of being associated with a style of politics that now seemed outdated and counterproductive. Others tried to adapt, adopting a more respectful tone in public forums, aware that the public was watching and judging more closely than ever before. For Crockett, the days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. She met with constituents, listened to their concerns, and worked late into the night drafting new proposals. She knew that the spotlight would not last forever, that the real test of leadership was not in a single moment, but in the daily grind of governance. Still, she allowed herself a moment of reflection, grateful for the outpouring of support and determined to use her platform to make a lasting difference. The hearing had changed her, but it had also changed the conversation. It had shown that preparation and integrity could triumph over arrogance and assumption, that facts could still matter in a world too often dominated by noise. It had reminded everyone watching that the future belonged not to those who shouted the loudest, but to those who listened, learned, and led with purpose. As the weeks turned into months, the story of that day continued to inspire. It was retold at rallies and town halls, cited in speeches and campaign ads, studied in classrooms and leadership seminars. It became a touchstone for a new generation of leaders. Proof that the old rules could be rewritten, that respect could be demanded and earned, that one voice, prepared and unafraid, could change everything. As the months passed, the legacy of that hearing room moment only grew. Crockett's name became synonymous with a new kind of leadership, one that valued substance over spectacle and preparation over posturing. She was invited to speak at universities, where students packed auditoriums to hear her recount not just the details of the confrontation, but the years of hard work and quiet resilience that had prepared her for it. She spoke about the importance of doing your homework, of knowing your facts, and of never letting someone else's assumptions define your worth. In interviews, Crockett was candid about the pressures she faced. She acknowledged the weight of expectations, the scrutiny that came with every public appearance. and the constant challenge of balancing her responsibilities to her district with the demands of a national spotlight. But she also spoke about the support she received from her family, her staff, and the countless people who reached out to say that her example had given them courage. "I didn't set out to make a statement," she told one reporter. "I just wanted to do my job, to represent my community, and to stand up for what I believe in. If that inspires others, then I'm grateful." Meanwhile, the political landscape continued to shift. The hearing had exposed not just the weaknesses in Blackburn's arguments, but the fragility of a political culture that relied on intimidation and exclusion. Other members of Congress, seeing the public's reaction, began to rethink their own approaches. Some reached out to Crockett privately, seeking her advice on how to engage more constructively with colleagues from different backgrounds. Others, recognizing the changing tides, made a point of publicly supporting initiatives that promoted diversity, equity, and inclusion. Blackburn, for her part, struggled to regain her footing. The controversy surrounding her comments refused to die down, resurfacing every time she appeared in public or made a statement on the Senate floor. Her attempts to pivot to other issues were met with skepticism, her credibility damaged by the very tactics she had once used to assert her authority. In interviews, she was repeatedly asked about the hearing, forced to confront the reality that her words had not just hurt her opponent, but had undermined her own standing. The broader impact was felt across the country. In communities large and small, people began to talk about what it meant to lead with integrity. Teachers used the hearing as a case study in civics classes, encouraging students to analyze the arguments, the strategies, and the outcomes. Business leaders cited Crockett's example in workshops on negotiation and conflict resolution, emphasizing the value of preparation and the importance of responding to criticism with facts rather than emotion. For Crockett, the experience was both humbling and empowering. She continued to push for policies that would benefit her constituents, using her newfound platform to advocate for issues that had long been ignored. She worked to build coalitions across party lines, believing that real progress required collaboration and mutual respect, and she remained committed to mentoring the next generation of leaders, sharing her story not as a tale of personal triumph, but as a blueprint for how anyone, regardless of background, could make a difference. The story of that day in the hearing room became a part of the national consciousness, a reminder that the arc of history is shaped not just by grand gestures, but by the quiet courage of those who refuse to be silenced. It was a story about standing up, speaking out, and refusing to accept the limitations others try to impose. It was a story about the power of preparation, the strength of community, and the enduring importance of respect. As Crockett looked to the future, she did so with a sense of purpose and possibility. She knew that there would be more battles to fight, more challenges to overcome, but she also knew that she was not alone, that she stood on the shoulders of those who had come before her, and that she was paving the way for those who would come after. In the end, that was the true legacy of the hearing. Not just a viral moment, but a movement. The movement sparked by Crockett's example began to take root in unexpected places. In city councils and state legislatures, young leaders cited her story as proof that the old ways of doing business could be challenged and changed. Community organizers referenced her hearing room composure in workshops on advocacy, teaching others how to respond to adversity with facts, not fury. Even in corporate boardrooms, executives discussed the Crockett principle. The idea that true authority comes from preparation, not position, and that respect is earned through action, not demanded by title. Crockett herself became a sought-after mentor, her inbox overflowing with messages from aspiring public servants, students, and professionals. She made time to respond, offering advice, encouragement, and, when possible, a listening ear. She reminded them that setbacks were inevitable, that criticism was part of the journey, but that the key was to stay focused on the work and to never let anyone else's doubts define your path. Her words resonated, not just because of what she had accomplished, but because of the authenticity with which she spoke. Meanwhile, the political establishment continued to grapple with the implications of the hearing. Some tried to dismiss it as a fluke, a one-off moment unlikely to be repeated, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Across the country, candidates who embraced Crockett's approach, who prioritized substance over spectacle, who prepared meticulously, who treated opponents with respect, even in disagreement, began to win elections. Voters responded to authenticity, to leaders who listened and learned, who admitted when they were wrong and celebrated when others succeeded. Blackburn's legacy, by contrast, became a cautionary tale. Her refusal to adapt, her reliance on outdated tactics, and her inability to recognize the changing expectations of the public left her increasingly isolated. Former allies distanced themselves, donors redirected their support, and even some longtime staffers quietly moved on, seeking opportunities with leaders who better reflected the values of a new era. The lesson was clear. The world was changing, and those who refused to change with it risked being left behind. For Crockett, the journey was far from over. She continued to face challenges, some subtle, others overt. There were still those who questioned her qualifications, who tried to undermine her authority, who whispered that her success was a fluke. But she met each challenge with the same determination that had carried her through the hearing. She prepared, she listened, she responded with facts and with grace. And each time, she emerged stronger, her reputation growing, her influence expanding. The story of the hearing room confrontation became a touchstone for a generation hungry for change. It was retold in campaign ads, in graduation speeches, in conversations between parents and children. It became a symbol of what was possible when someone refused to be defined by others' expectations, when they insisted on being seen and heard on their own terms. It was a reminder that the future belonged to those who were willing to do the work, to stand up, and to speak out. As the anniversary of the hearing approached, Crockett reflected on all that had changed. She thought about the young people who had written to her, the colleagues who had reached out for guidance, the communities that had been inspired to demand more from their leaders. She knew that the work was ongoing, that progress was never linear, that every victory brought new challenges. But she also knew that the seeds of change had been planted, and that they were beginning to bear fruit. In the end, the true impact of that day was not measured in headlines or viral clips, but in the quiet, steady transformation of a culture. It was seen in the way people treated each other, in the standards they set for their leaders, in the courage they found to speak up when it mattered most. It was a legacy built, not on a single moment, but on 1,000 acts of preparation, resilience, and respect. As Crockett walked the halls of Congress, she carried with her the echoes of that pivotal day not as a burden, but as a source of strength. Each handshake, each conversation, each new challenge was met with the same resolve that had defined her response to Blackburn. The world was watching, but more importantly, it was learning. In the end, Crockett's greatest victory was not in silencing a critic, but in inspiring a movement, one that proved preparation, dignity, and truth could still change the course of history. The hearing room was just the beginning. The real legacy was written in the lives she touched, the leaders she inspired, and the future she helped to shape.